Hello, I am Ryan.
Hello, I am Amy. Welcome to Listen to English Podcast.
Today's podcast is about how to improve your English. So many people ask how they can get better at English. And it's easy to get stuck thinking it's all about textbooks and grammar rules.
Right, absolutely. It appears that there are so many fun and easy ways to improve that go beyond those traditional methods. We're going to be sharing a few simple steps with you today that can help you on your English language journey.
I love it. Okay, let's dive right in. What's the first step we should be thinking about?
Well, the first step is to listen to English every day. And while that might seem obvious, it's truly the foundation for everything else. You see, listening helps you learn new words naturally and understand how people actually speak in real-life conversations, like how we use idioms or slang.
It's like immersing yourself in the language, right? And the great thing is there are so many resources out there these days. You can listen to podcasts like ours, of course, or music, movies, even the news. What do you think are some of the most effective ways to use those resources?
That's a great question. It's not just about passively listening, it's about actively engaging with the language. For example, with music, you could try listening to songs with the lyrics in front of you and focus on how the words are pronounced and how they fit together in a sentence. That can really help you with your pronunciation understanding of connected speech.
That's a good tip. I know I've learned a lot of new vocabulary just from watching movies and TV shows in English. Sometimes I even repeat phrases out loud to practice my pronunciation. What about you? Do you have any favorite methods for listening to English?
Oh, definitely. I love listening to podcasts because they cover so many different topics, and you can usually find ones that match your interests. It's like having a conversation with someone who's an expert on something you're curious about. And the more you listen, the more you'll start to pick up on the natural rhythm and intonation of English, which is so important for speaking fluently.
And don't worry if you don't understand every single word at first, right?
Yeah.
I remember when I first started learning English, I felt overwhelmed because I couldn't follow everything.
Yeah.
But I just kept listening, and gradually it started to make more sense.
Exactly. The key is consistency. Studies show that our brains are incredibly good at picking up patterns and sounds, even if we're not consciously aware of it. So even if you feel lost at times, just keep listening, and your brain will start to make those connections in the background.
I think that's really encouraging for people because sometimes you could feel like giving up when you don't understand everything,
Hmm.
but you're saying it's okay to just let it wash over you and your brain will start to do the work, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. It's like learning a musical instrument. The more you're exposed to the sounds, the more familiar they become. And studies show that this consistent listening also helps improve your speaking skills because you're internalizing those natural rhythms and intonations. You start to get a feel for how English is supposed to sound.
Okay, so step one is to listen every day. That makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about speaking. What's your advice here? I know so many people, including myself sometimes, are afraid to speak English even when they understand quite a bit.
Absolutely. Speaking is where so many English language learners stumble. It's completely natural to feel nervous or afraid of making mistakes. And it can be so frustrating when you have all these thoughts in your head, but you can't express them the way you want to.
It's like stage fright, but for language,
Yeah.
right? You get that feeling of your heart racing, your palms sweating, and your mind going blank.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Mistakes are actually valuable learning opportunities. Think about how babies learn to speak. They make tons of mistakes, but they don't give up, do they? They keep practicing and experimenting until they get it right.
So you're saying we should embrace the mistakes and see them as part of the process? That's a good way to look at it.
Absolutely. Don't wait until you feel perfectly fluent to start speaking. Find opportunities to practice, whether it's with friends, language exchange partners online, joining conversation groups, or even just talking to yourself. It might sound silly, but it can actually be very helpful. It really can. I used to feel self-conscious talking to myself in English, but then I realized nobody's listening anyway, so why not give it a try? And you know what? It helped me become more comfortable with the sounds of the language, and it even helped me think of things to say more quickly when I was actually talking to someone else.
That's a really good point. Sometimes we can be our own worst critics, right? We build up these mental barriers,
Yeah.
and then we end up not speaking at all. But like you said, the more you practice, the more confident and fluent you'll become.
Exactly. And remember, fluency isn't about perfection. It's about communication. It's about getting your message across and connecting with other people.
Yeah,
And that's something to celebrate no matter what level you're at.
I love that. So we've got listening, we've got speaking, and both are so important. What's the next step in our journey to English mastery?
Well, step 3 might surprise some people. It's to think in English.
Think in English. That sounds tricky. I mean, I can understand thinking in English when you're speaking English, but how do you do it all the time? Tell me more.
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? This is about shifting your internal dialogue. Many learners get stuck in the habit of translating everything from their native language to English in their heads. And that can really slow down the thinking and speaking process.
Oh, I've definitely been guilty of that. And it does make speaking feel so much slower and clunkier, like you're constantly searching for the right word.
Exactly, because you're essentially adding an extra step to the process. The goal is to start thinking directly in English to bypass that translation stage.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we train our brains to think in English when we're not actively speaking it? It seems like a real challenge.
It is a challenge, but it's definitely possible with practice. It's all about creating new habits. Start small. Incorporate English into your everyday thoughts. For example, when you wake up in the morning, instead of thinking good morning in your native language, try thinking I'm waking up, it's a beautiful day in English.
Or when you're having breakfast, you could think, this coffee is delicious. Or I wonder what I should wear today, all in English, Ray.
Huh.
Simple things like that can make a big difference.
Precisely. The more you do this, the more natural it will become. You'll find that speaking becomes much smoother and more spontaneous because you're not having to translate everything in your head.
It's almost like you're rewiring your brain to think in a new language, which is incredible.
It is. And the benefits extend beyond fluency. When you think in English, you start to understand the nuances of the language better, the humor, the cultural references, all of those things that make language come alive.
That's such a good point. You start to appreciate the richness and depth of the language in a whole new way. I'm already feeling inspired to start incorporating more English into my thoughts. Okay, so we've got listening, speaking, thinking. What's next on our list?
Step 4 is all about vocabulary. It's learning words in context.
Learning words in context. I remember hearing about this in school, but I think it's one of those concepts that's really worth revisiting because it's so important for building a strong vocabulary. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with the concept, can you explain what it means to learn words in context?
Of course, context refers to the surrounding information that helps you understand the meaning of a word. It's about learning words as part of a sentence or phrase rather than in isolation. It's seeing how words work together in a real-life setting.
So instead of just memorizing a word like fast from a vocabulary list, which can feel pretty abstract and meaningless, you learn it in a sentence like, the cheetah is a very fast animal, or that car is driving too fast. And suddenly the word fast has a much richer meaning because you can visualize it in action.
Exactly. Those examples give you a much clearer understanding of how the word fast is actually used in real life.
It's like seeing the word in action, right? It makes so much more sense than just trying to memorize a definition from a dictionary. And it's probably more memorable, too.
It definitely is. Studies have shown that learning words in context leads to better retention because you're creating stronger connections in your brain. You're not just passively memorizing words, you're actively understanding how they fit into the larger picture of language.
So we're not just adding new words to our vocabulary, we're actually integrating them into our understanding of how English works.
Precisely. And this makes the learning process feel less like a chore and more like a natural part of interacting with the language, which is what we want, right? We want to enjoy the process of learning English.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about listening, speaking, thinking, and learning vocabulary in context. Do you want to quickly recap the 4 steps before we move on to some other helpful tips?
Absolutely. To recap, the 4 steps to improve your English are: 1, listen to English every day. 2, speak without fear. 3, think in English. And 4, learn words in context. These are powerful tools for any English language learner, no matter your level.
I'm really liking the emphasis on consistent daily practice. It's not about cramming or trying to become fluent overnight, which is unrealistic anyway. It's about building those habits that will lead to long-term improvement.
Exactly. It's like exercising a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So what are some other things our listeners can do to supplement those 4 key steps? Any bonus tips you can share? Well, we've talked a lot about actively using English by listening, speaking, and even thinking in the language. But what about reading? I've always found reading to be such a relaxing way to improve my vocabulary and grammar.
Absolutely. Reading in English is another fantastic way to immerse yourself in the language. And it's a treasure trove of learning opportunities. You're exposed to different writing styles, vocabulary, and grammar structures, all while enjoying a good story or learning about something new.
And there's so much variety out there these days. You can read books, articles, blogs, news websites, anything that sparks your interest. I think it's important to choose materials that you genuinely enjoy because that will make the reading experience so much more enjoyable, and you'll be more likely to stick with it.
Precisely. Find something that captivates you. And don't be afraid to start with something simple, even if it's a children's book or a graded reader. The important thing is to get comfortable with reading in English and to develop a love for it.
That's a great point. Sometimes people feel like they have to jump into Shakespeare right away. But there's no shame in starting with something easier and gradually working your way up.
I agree. Start where you feel comfortable and gradually challenge yourself as you progress. And as you read, pay attention to new words and phrases. And try to guess their meaning from the context. You can always look them up later if you need to.
That's a really useful tip. It's kind of like solving a puzzle, figuring out the meaning of a word based on the clues around it. It makes reading so much more active and engaging.
It does. And speaking of active engagement, another great tip is to write in English regularly.
Writing. That's such an important skill, and it's often overlooked. But it makes perfect sense. Writing is another way to actively use the language and to solidify your grammar and vocabulary knowledge. It forces you to think more carefully about sentence structure, word choice, and punctuation.
Exactly. And just like with reading, it doesn't have to be anything formal or intimidating. You can start by writing simple things like emails, shopping lists, or even just journaling your thoughts in English.
Journaling in English is a fantastic idea. It's a low-pressure way to practice writing and to express yourself creatively. You can write about anything that's on your mind, and you don't have to worry about being judged or making mistakes. It's just you and the page.
And over time, as you become more comfortable, you can challenge yourself with more complex writing tasks like essay stories or even blog posts. There's so many possibilities.
The key is to make writing a regular habit, just like with speaking and listening. The more you write, the better you'll become. And who knows, you might even discover a hidden talent for writing.
You never know. Now, before we wrap up, I want to emphasize something we touched on earlier. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's such a crucial part of the learning process.
Yes, embrace those mistakes. They're your friends, not your enemies.
Exactly. Mistakes are inevitable, and they're actually a sign that you're learning and growing. They show that you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone and trying new things.
It's so easy to get discouraged when you make mistakes. But it's important to remember that everyone who learns a new language goes through this, even native speakers.
Absolutely. Everyone makes mistakes. It's part of being human. So instead of beating yourself up over mistakes, try to see them as opportunities to learn and improve.
I love that. It's about shifting your perspective and viewing mistakes as stepping stones on your path to fluency. So analyze your mistakes, figure out why you made them, and try to avoid making them again in the future. And don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're not sure why you made a mistake, ask a teacher, a tutor, a language partner, or even look it up online. There are so many resources available to help you along the way.
Yes, and don't be afraid to experiment and try different approaches to learning. What works for one person might not work for another. Some people thrive in classroom settings, while others prefer self-study. The key is to find what works best for you and your learning style.
So true. And speaking of finding what works for you, I think it's important to find what motivates you in your language learning journey.
That's such a good point, because if you're not enjoying the process, it's easy to lose steam.
Exactly. So think about why you're learning English. Is it to travel, to communicate with family or friends, to advance in your career, to experience new cultures? Once you have that clear purpose in mind, it can fuel your motivation and make the whole journey feel more meaningful.
And don't forget to have fun with it. Learning a language should be an enjoyable experience. Celebrate your successes no matter how small they seem. And remember, every step you take brings you closer to fluency.
I completely agree. So there you have it, folks. Our comprehensive guide to improving your English language skills. We've covered a lot of ground today, from listening and speaking to thinking and reading, and we've emphasized the importance of embracing mistakes and finding what motivates you.
We hope you found these tips helpful, and we encourage you to start implementing them today. Remember, every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to your language learning goals.
And don't forget to keep practicing and to keep those English muscles working.
Now, before we sign off, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced while learning English, or some of the things that you're currently working on?
Share your experiences and tips with us in the comments section below. We love hearing from our amazing community and learning from each other.
And who knows, maybe your insights will inspire someone else on their language learning journey.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Listen to English podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.